Chapter 5. Table for Precisely Two. The 2 lakes bustled with even more spirit than Guildmere's streets. Between the hanging garlands and the caladia, the profusion of pink and green was enough to give Cordetta a bizarrely bottomless hankering for raspberry tarts. Heath hesitantly offered his sword and hat to the sleek, raven-haired hostess, and she beckoned a waiter over to show them a table. "Heath, did it have to be the 2 lakes?" Cordetta asked, knowing it was far too late for such questions. "Of course it does. Only the best for my princess wife." He gave her waist a squeeze. "Besides, I have a reservation, and reservations are like promises." The waiter, a dignified if gaunt man, with a thin scar barely stretching above his shirt collar, welcomed them cordially. He escorted them past the duo of golden sturgeon, which flanked the entry to the main dining floor. Beyond was a large circle of checkered tile and a maze of tables. 2 grand staircases curved to a mezzanine floor, down from which radiated the shy stares of bashful couples. Cordetta scanned the tables surreptitiously, wondering whether somewhere in this restaurant there was a table with a lonely young man at it, waiting for her. Then she stopped scanning, because what if he made eye contact? Meanwhile, the waiter had fixed on which table he would take them to. Not the beautiful one set in the middle of the room where princesses could see and be seen, but the one under the staircase? Cordetta blurted, before she could stop herself. In her former life, no waiter in the land would have dared. It was only a moment later that she remembered she was both unnoticed and trying to stay that way. It wouldn't do to be seen by anyone who might recognize her, or her supposed date. Heath shot her the first look of genuine surprise she'd seen from him. The waiter, on the other hand, might have been made of glass, so smoothly did he pivot them back to the center of the room and offer them the most prominent table and place a shiny silver water pitcher on it. "Will this table please, madame?" the waiter asked, brushing his right hand over his left in what appeared to be a self-restraining gesture. Cordetta gave Heath a quick questioning glance, but he only pulled out a chair for her. Cordetta recognized the thought expressed in that gesture, that asking for the corner now would only make them more conspicuous. Heath watched the waiter carefully, then took his own seat, casting a gaze at the tables and guests all around. They looked right back. Cordetta couldn't help but notice one man's cufflinks as he shook out his napkin. They had a gear shape that reminded her of Clogsmith. Heath picked up the linen napkin and fluffed it out 3 times over the table before laying it in his lap. "Excellent," he told Cordetta as soon as the waiter was out of earshot. "I love exposing my back to assassins while I eat. Really gives the meal flavor to know it could be my last." "Assassins?" Cordetta repeated. "But Heath, the old man said there wouldn't be another tack today. And then he walked off to have a drink in the middle of the day," Heath scoffed. "Anyway, we're in a refined establishment with tons of witnesses, and they'd still have to go unnoticed by me," Cordetta pointed out. "I can see trouble coming just as well as you." "Oh, really? Then tell me, up which sleeve does our waiter conceal a knife?" "A knife? You're paranoid. After that attack, I'm sure you must be rattled, but man, this meal's gonna taste incredible. The roast quail sounds good today, don't you think?" It did, but Cordetta was intrigued by the mushroom stroganoff with side salad. When the waiter returned, coming up behind Heath, Heath's hand crept toward his dinner knife, and he fixed his gaze on the shiny pitcher. Cordetta realized he must be watching the man's reflection. "Madam, what can I get for you today?" the waiter asked. After Cordetta asked him for the stroganoff, the waiter nodded, then bent low and whispered into Heath's ear, "For you, sir, I recommend a slice of halmagorn, but of course you'll want to inspect it first." Heath studied the man, then nodded. "I'll be right back, honey," he told Cordetta. He got up, and suddenly his chair seemed to beckon any anxious, dateless boy to plant his buttocks in it and engage her in conversation. "Wait, no!" Cordetta said. "Heath, I need you to stay here." Heath looked at her, half curious and half smug. "I said I'll be right back, don't worry." He squeezed her shoulder as he passed her, following the waiter to the stairs. Cordetta, for her part, would have not gone anywhere with someone she suspected might kill her, especially not if she was supposed to be responsible for a princess's safety. But all she could do was wave prettily and enjoy the decor. The extravagant chandelier which dominated the room was fashioned of cut glass, enhanced with the addition of pink roses woven throughout. Being in the middle of the room, Cordetta had to crane her head all the way back like a swan to see it, but its light set the cherry wood of the walls ablaze and was beautifully framed by the 2 ornately carved wooden banisters of the tall staircases. Images of fishes and aquatic greenery swam along the stained glass blue balustrade, up to the mezzanine floor where affluent couples likely had a great view of Lake Giselle to the north as well as the hoi polloi below them. She had to admit the Guildmerites did have a flair for decor. Even the tables had dahlia centerpieces on pearly white ceramic trivets. Cordetta's admiration was interrupted by a tall, pale man with a polite smile. He waved, more with his fingers than his hands, and rubbed the back of Heath's chair. "Oh, hey, that's one of mine," the man said, pointing to Cordetta's dress. "I beg your pardon?" Cordetta replied, but the man was already helping himself to a seat. "On second thought, never mind," he said. "That was a former life." "Ah, well, they sell them at a sweet little shop down the street if you change your mind," Cordetta said. The man's smile widened at a slow but continual pace to show perfect, blinding white teeth. "So, can I help you?" The man was old, but at least it was a well-kept sort of old. His pale blonde hair was combed back, but at least he still had it, and his skin was clear and poreless. She couldn't place his age for sure, but if it was past 55, she'd eat a platy. Someone else's, of course. The waiter returned. "Madam, a complimentary course of bruschetta and a bottle of our finest Pinot Noir. Please forgive our earlier attempt to seat you elsewhere." "James, I'll have that plate of braised trout," the man told the waiter. "You know the one. The one that was sent back by Lady Fusshart?" The waiter's lip curled. "Very good, Mr. Leblanc. Sir." He left quickly. "I'm the chef here, you see," Basile explained with a self-conscious giggle. "Oh, so," Cordetta began. "It's very nice to meet you, Basile. I'm Cordetta, and I'm sure any entree from your kitchen will be lovely when it arrives. But I'm actually here with someone." "Well, yes." Basile stuck his hands out wide in a gesture of presentation. Cordetta cast an anxious glance over Basile's shoulder for any sign of Heath returning, as the bruschetta topping steamed lazily in front of her. Seeing no such indication, she decided to lean into the one other reason she might be here. Somebody's grandmother." Basile's smile jumped instantly to maximum wide, every inch of it completely earnest. He laughed out loud, and for the first time in her life, Cordetta understood what was meant by someone's laughter sounding like bells. "Yes, she told me. She's my mother, actually." Something in Cordetta's belly began curling, until she felt like her stomach had become a flat concrete wall. Cordetta looked up at Basile's sheepish grin. There had to be a way to let this guy down easy. "So, do you have all your dinners here?" she managed. Basile shook his head. "You might not believe it, but I wasn't always a chef." "Oh." Cordetta imagined a prior life of selling expensive cheeses door to door. For some reason, she pictured a uniform of pastels and tassels. Yes, you mentioned a former life." "Where the hell was Heath?" Basile cast his bright blue eyes somewhere over her shoulder. Cordetta didn't know whether to be offended or relieved. "Yes, it's something I've always wanted. And at 51 years old, I decided, why wait?" Basile looked up adoringly at the chandelier. Just as Cordetta felt the need to prod him, his gaze snapped back to her. "And that was 3 years ago." "Mm-hmm. So what did you do before?" Basile tucked his hands under his chin. "And it's so hard going from one career to another, especially at my age. But you see, I've always had a passion for helping people. And what do people need? That's right, good food." Basile chuckled again. Cordetta took a dainty sip of wine, which confirmed that food was the last thing she needed right now. Her intestines had begun to attempt escape simultaneously out through her belly and up through her throat. The aroma of the bruschetta seemed only to mock her. Basile was clearly nice, but what sins was Cordetta being punished for, that she'd been set up with him for smooches and late-night conversation? She hoped Heath would return to save her, but also that he'd never see her in such a predicament as long as either of them lived. Maybe the waiter would blind Heath with his supposed knife. Otherwise, she didn't see how she could ever live a full life after this. The waiter's faintly contemptuous footsteps announced his return with Heath's and Cordetta's orders. Not the hero she needed, but the hero she deserved. "Sir, I know you're otherwise engaged," James said, glancing at Cordetta. She thought about mouthing "help me" to him. "But the eggs for the tort aren't peeking right, no matter how much we whip them." Basile rolled his eyes confidingly in Cordetta's direction. "Pardon me, miss," he sighed, "but it sounds like a little daring do is required." Basile flexed his arm to no effect before sauntering back to the kitchen. James sent a brief, pitying look her way. It was all Cordetta could do not to call him back and ask about Heath. However, she needn't have. Emerging around the corner, Heath strode back to his seat at speed and began slicing up thick chunks of quail. He pounded 3 forkfuls into his mouth, swallowed, and washed the rest down with a hefty gulp of wine before looking at Cordetta apologetically. "Man, that's the stuff. Can't stay, though. I have to finish negotiating the details with Grigory. Don't touch the wings, they're my favorite part, and I'm saving them for later." "Grigory?" Cordetta repeated. "Wait, no, the details of what?" Heath patted his stomach, then stood. "James' Confederate." Cordetta's stomach started coiling again. "You can't leave now. What if he comes back?" "Oh no, I had James all wrong. He's not planning to stab anybody." It was not James Cordetta was worried about. Heath! But Cordetta could no more compel Heath to stay than she could forbid Basile to return. And sure enough, Basile returned, hands held up triumphantly. "Now that's what I call a tort accompli," he beamed. He sat and tapped his chin. "Now, where were we?" "What you did," Cordetta said, "before becoming a chef." "Oh, I was a world-renowned bounty hunter." Cordetta blinked slowly at him for a moment before Basile threw his head back and laughed until Cordetta began to hope the chandelier might fall on the both of them. "What's the matter? Don't you believe me?" That's okay. I'll let you in on a little secret. It's not true. I was actually a designer of women's fashions. I designed the very dress you're wearing right now, remember?" While Cordetta nodded and tried to think of a polite way to terminate this date, Basile pushed the contents of his plate around disappointedly. "Oh dear, quail," Basile said. Not at all what I asked for. He poked his fork through the wing and began to nibble away at it. Well, at least it's cooked right. Basile continued autobiographizing for what felt like several weeks, though the setting of the sun outside the window did not agree, and neither did her Stroganoff's stubbornness in cooling. Until finally, Cordetta felt compelled to interrupt halfway through Part 3, Chapter 6, the one in which our culinary hero heroically acquired a position at the Two Lakes using the personal connections of his wealthy family. Though, his love of his new craft was evident, and when the mushroom stroganoff finally cooled enough for Cordetta to take a bite, she had to admit Basile knew what he was doing. Not even the cooks in Ellenville's palace were this accomplished. "Pretty good, no?" Basile said, "but enough about me. Tell me about yourself." Cordetta's mouth opened to tell him that she was married, happily so, and with several children. Then she closed it again and opened it to tell him she was on the run from marriage to a man who planned to murder her. Murder with weaponized boredom was still murder. But even as she composed the sentences, she saw their futility. Never mind letting him down easy. Basile was so determinedly cheerful, it seemed impossible to let him down at all. In the end, she made up something about being on holiday. Lying to Basile was weirdly difficult, and his pastel smile gave away no hint of whether he believed her. But he didn't pry. James was soon back. "Sir, there's another problem in the kitchen. The chicken Alfredo lasagna requires its head chef. The perils of being indispensable." Basile smiled apologetically. "Honestly, I don't even like the Alfredo lasagna. It's so blunt. When they let me set my own menu, it'll be the first thing to go." He left Cordetta to figure out what to say. Inconceivably, Heath emerged from the kitchen just as Basile was approaching its doors. They stared at each other for a moment, struggled to pass each other for several more, before Heath stood dramatically aside and held out both arms to the door. As Basile disappeared through the door, Cordetta thought she saw him put a hand to his, presumably, giggling mouth. "Funny bunch they got here, huh?" Heath plopped into his chair and looked down at the bare bones of what had previously been a quail wing. "Did you eat this?" he demanded. Cordetta shook her head guiltily and silently, hoping against hope she might be able to smile her way out of her entire life right then. It was not to be. "What the hell, Cordetta?" Heath exclaimed. "I told you the wing was my favorite part." That was rich, coming from someone who'd surely eaten all of Rosalie's cookies. "It's not my fault." "So what? It ate itself?" "Or are you telling me, Princess, my lovely wife who thinks I'm such a brute, can't even defend a wing of quail in my absence?" "Fine, I ate it." Heath squinted at her. "I know you did." Then he stuck the dinner and salad forks into the quail and rolled it over on the plate. "Lucky for you, birds have too." He sliced it off and pushed it into his mouth. When he pulled it back out, there was just the bone. While Cordetta was wondering whether bad table etiquette or bad table conversation made for worse manners, Basile's plate of trout arrived. James put it in front of Heath with a snide glance toward Cordetta. I ordered you something to make up for it," she told him hurriedly. "Why is the corner missing?" Heath said, pointing to a large chunk missing from the trout fillet. "Lady Fussheart must have quite the mouth," Cordetta guessed. "I suppose you ate that too." "How could I eat it when it was in the kitchen?" "How could you eat my wing?" "Just tell me about these mysterious details with Grigory." Smiling, Heath grabbed the candle and held it under his face. With the glow flattening his facial features, he stared ominously at Cordetta. "There's a specter haunting Guildmere, the specter of the Seep. And someone, or something, is possessing people. People like our unfortunate butcher friend." "Okay, Heath, even I know fiends don't possess people. Worst case, there's a few that can make you act funny." "Oh, funny, huh? Funny like, ha, I just butchered my neighbor and wore his intestines for a boa. What a hoot. Happened 3 days ago." "Heath, don't put me off my meal." Though she realized the thought of Basile had already nearly done that. "Anyway, I'm thinking of taking on the contract." "Contract? What do you—" But at that moment, the kitchen door swung wide. Basile's smile emerged for a half second, then he turned around to answer someone in the kitchen. "Heath, I need you to go do something for me right now." Heath raised an eyebrow. "Oh, this is going to be good. I can just tell." "Can you get that man over there to tell you where he bought those cufflinks?" Cordetta gestured to the man with the gear cufflinks she noticed earlier. Sure, after I'm done eating." "What if he leaves?" Cordetta protested. "No, you have to do it right now. I'll let you buy all that horse food you wanted. I promise. I won't make so much as a peep in complaint." "And the smoked sausage links?" "Fine, the dog food too." Heath sighed. "I'm going to hold you to that." He pushed his chair back and walked over to the gentleman. It was almost a relief when Basile finally took his seat. He tucked into Lady Fussheart's trout with gusto. "We serve a number of mini tarts. Perhaps you've seen them?" Cordetta had, on the tables around them, but at that moment she couldn't think of that. "So I hear there's a specter haunting Guildmere?" she said. "Oh, not that. That's terrible dinner conversation," Basile scoffed. "Oh, but I suppose you must be afraid for your safety, although I must say we have very good security here at the Two Lakes. Very well." There have been a spate of mental breakdowns over the past several months. Every few days, somebody will snap and do something terrible. Nothing like this ever used to happen, of course. Some say it's the work of a seep saint. He stage whispered that last word. Cordetta steepled her fingers under her chin involuntarily. Despite Heath's style, she couldn't shake the feeling he had some kind of connection to that mysterious group. The Seep Saints were a group of humans who, it was said, had learned to live off the land within the seep. Their experience slaying the monsters they came into contact with gave them powers beyond the ordinary, that and a dose of madness. Rumors outnumbered known facts 100 to 1, and there were probably less than a dozen alive at any given time. The ruthlessness and the heartlessness of the Stone Man was the only truly agreed-upon thing. Of course, it's probably just some crazy coincidence, but there does seem to be something of the seep about it. Basile shrugged. Best just to get on with one's life, don't you think? I don't know, Cordetta said. With things like that, there's always a chance you become its next victim. She already had become one of its victims in a small way. However, Cordetta was not about to expose her vulnerable feelings about that to a complete stranger, especially not one she wouldn't trust to defend her from a dachshund. Basile tapped his chin. Well, maybe. But take me, for example, he began. I'd really, really rather not, Cordetta thought in reply. I never saw myself as just someone else's cook, any more than I saw myself as someone else's designer. I want to be my own man. To set the menu of my own restaurant would be like finally setting the menu of my own life. Do you know what I mean? Despite all, Cordetta found herself leaning forward all of a sudden. I know exactly what you mean. I never wanted to be never mind. But what I do want to do is make gadgets. I'm really good at it. And they're really useful. Fascinating. People need good gadgets too. What do they do? Cordetta searched Basile's expression closely. At most 3 people had ever asked her what her gadgets actually did, and those had been Mother, Father, and Rosalie. In Cordetta's opinion, they'd all been hoping to hear that they did nothing, an opinion she felt was thoroughly confirmed by the fact that their eyes had all glazed over the moment she described their function in any sort of detail. The Inventors Guild, likewise, had never invited her to submit so much as a word of publication, despite all the letters she'd written them over the years. Cordetta wasn't sure she was prepared to endure the world's indifference to her passion again in such a public setting. But something in Basile's eyes got her lips forming shapes and her tongue shaping sounds, and when she did, those eyes did not glaze over. They didn't quite look as though they comprehended. As Cordetta launched into an explanation of moonjade resonances and gear size ratios, Cordetta had a bad habit of answering the question of what things did in terms of how they worked, but they didn't shy back from trying either. Cordetta had the strangest sense, it was strange to her, that someone really cared about what she had to say. Of course, even sincere interest had its limits. Somewhere between moonjade shearing angles and seep-sewn consumption rates, Basile finally put up his hand. Hold on. Could we go back to that other thing? To this seep drinker engine? You said you got it to steam coffee while flying? Basile said. Cordetta nodded. What else could it cook? Basile asked. Cordetta wasn't entirely sure, but anything requiring heat was her guess. Anything? I see, Basile said. So, how much do you know how to cook? Why did Ben keep asking her that? Some. I make cappuccino. They're difficult to get right. You know, it's a whole process. Very modern. Basile nodded. What about that man you came in with? He's, my husband. Basile tisked gently, shaking his head. Come, my dear, there's no need for you to say that to me. I just want to know whether he cooks or not. He can make salted fish. Out of salt. And fish. That's about what I imagined. Still, I'm sure he's a lovely man and takes very good care of you in his own manner. Cordetta did not quite see it that way. Well, I shan't detain you any longer, Basile said, setting his fork down on the finished trout. Thank you for keeping Mother's hopes buoyed just that little while longer. What? I hope I didn't bore you. Mother's roped so many women into having dinner with me over the years. I'm afraid I haven't the heart to break hers with the truth. The best I can do is ensure they aren't too bored and don't have to do too much talking if they don't feel like it. Cordetta was pretty sure she understood. Your mother and mine would get along, I think. Talking to you, though, I've had an idea. A wonderful idea. Really? What? But Basile just smiled. All in good time, he said. I'll have a sampler of our tarts sent gratis to the table. Enjoy your stroganoff and your evening. Cordetta did just that, though she had to admit a certain lingering confusion over the whole situation. At least if Heath ever returned to finish his quail, she wasn't going to have to explain Basile's presence. As a matter of fact, Cordetta didn't think Heath needed to know about her simultaneous other date if he lived to be older than the quiet one. Seriously, though, where was that man? There was a limit to how much time a lady wanted to spend at a table by herself. Cordetta looked over at the cufflink guy, but Heath was long gone from there. Sighing, she looked up and admired the twinkling of the lavish chandelier. And then the double door up on the mezzanine exploded. Heath was diving in through one door while James hurtled in through the other. They turned to each other and exchanged nods. Moments later, a guard burst in through those same doors, halberd in hand, furious scowl just visible under his helmet. Cordetta thought he distinctly resembled one of the guards who hauled the butcher away. She wondered what Heath and James could have done to wind up so far on the wrong side of the law in such a short time. From the expressions on the lovely couples enjoying their dinners up on the mezzanine, so did they. Something was off about the guard, though. For one thing, he was holding his halberd with both hands at the base, as though it were a very long-handled hammer. For another, the longer Cordetta looked at him, the more he seemed to have the same expression as the blood-crazed butcher. He looked from Heath to James to Heath again, chest heaving with fury, and then he swung his halberd at Heath. Heath ducked, and the swing took out half the wall. Cordetta blinked disbelievingly, even as her wiser instinct told her to run, as the other guests were starting to do. The engineer went too deep in her not to puzzle over the impossibility of solid timbers shattering so easily, even as fine splinters of cherry wood rained down upon her stroganoff and her head. The guard wasn't slowing either. He swung for Heath again, who narrowly avoided being cut in half by jumping over the railing and landing on one of the tables. The guard flung himself down after him, driving his halberd through the table, but at least Heath had time to dive away and roll to his feet. Cordetta hurriedly put out the candles before they could start an inferno. "Heath!" Cordetta yelled. "Here!" She tossed him his knife. It was, admittedly, a table knife. Still, Heath chucked it deftly at the man's nose. Thoroughly enraged now, the guard threw his halberd in response, javelin style. It sailed over Heath's shoulder and embedded itself in the woodwork. Cordetta doubted whether even the guard would be able to get it back, and judging by Heath's sudden smirk, she wasn't alone. Of course, that still left Heath against a heavily armored and absurdly strong man, with Heath wearing little more to armor himself than the cloak and hat Cordetta had bought him. A series of plates, spinning in from above, shattered against the guard's helmet. A solid effort from James, but the guard barely seemed to notice, only staggering off balance for a moment as he advanced toward Heath. Heath stood his ground, though Cordetta saw him swallow hard. The guard swung out with his fists, but Heath ducked and slipped past them, around to the guard's rear. He gave the guard a kick in the thigh, staggering him again. "James!" Heath shouted, before making a complex, tactical-looking series of hand gestures. James nodded his understanding. Heath then made a gesture to Cordetta that was quite simple. He pointed the way out of the restaurant. Cordetta agreed this was a good idea, but somehow she felt less safe the closer she got to the exit. Yes, there was a crazy guard, but who was to say that there weren't more crazies just outside? And out there, no one would be looking out for her. When had the world become so violent, Cordetta wondered? Had it always been this way, and she'd only been insulated from it all in her parents' palace? Cordetta knew she hadn't experienced the world the way Heath had, but she didn't think she was that sheltered. No, things were changing in Lorcia. The guard was charging James now. James was not as nimble as Heath, and all the thrown objects in the world weren't enough to keep the guard from advancing up the stairs, seizing James by the shirt collar and flinging him into a wall, after which he was quite still. Heath had been dogging the guard in order to support James, but now he was alone. Cordetta's heart leaped into her throat as Heath jumped at the guard and locked his arms around the man's armor in a full Nelson. The guard thrashed in all directions, trying to shake Heath loose, but he made the mistake of getting too close to the wall while also facing it. Heath brought his legs up and kicked violently against it. The grappling pair fell, first against the balustrade and then, from the guard's sheer mass, through it. Fishy glass shards tumbled in a waterfall before them. Heath kicked and swung in midair so that he landed on top. Even so, Cordetta felt the impact in her teeth. The guard rolled Heath over, and Heath just managed to roll him over again. They were in the center of the room now. Heath maintained his grip, but it was slipping, and he was starting to show his exhaustion. "Cordetta!" Heath kicked someone's fallen steak knife across the floor to her. Cordetta's skin went clammy as she tried to picture what Heath surely wanted her to do. She couldn't kill this man. Whatever the seep was doing to him wasn't his fault. "Heath!" she protested. "I can't!" "Cordetta!" Heath yelled. "The chandelier!" Cordetta looked up, and sure enough, found it directly above them. Oh, Cordetta could do that. She ran over to the ropes holding the chandelier up and, with one last mournful look upward, sliced through them. "Done!" "Ha!" Heath bellowed. He released his hold on the guard and rolled rapidly sideways. As the cut rope went slack, the chandelier seemed to almost hover for a moment. Then it slammed down upon the guard like a fist of glass. Cordetta hoped that armor covered all of him. The guard howled and thrashed, but the chandelier weighed him down in his armor. It was shortly after that someone else from the city guard, someone sane this time, finally showed up. The man's initial assessment of the situation, that Heath had assaulted a member of the guard for kicks and then trashed the city's best restaurant, didn't take too long to correct, and Heath was soon unhanded. Medics arrived hot on the scene with a bucket of lake-smelling water and dumped it on the insane guard's head before tending to the wounded. To Cordetta's shock, Heath went right back to his meal. The fighting had narrowly missed their table, and apparently Heath didn't mind picking splinters out of his quail. That, or he really was that stubborn. Actually, it probably was that. Not knowing what else to do, Cordetta retook her own seat, nibbling at the mini-tarts that were just now arriving. "Any chance I can get these to go?" she asked the waitress. "So I've got the job then?" Heath called to James as the medics carried him past their table on their way out. James was conscious enough to nod. "So this job then," Cordetta said. "I think it's well past time you told me what it is." Heath eyed the candle, then shrugged, probably deciding that relighting it would be too much work. "That specter I told you about? You and I are going to kill it."